And I will allow folks in 1 minute. And they all should be muted upon entry. So Ron, whenever you're ready, once they come in, the floor is yours, sir.
All right, I'm just kind of watching the waiting room to see how many people are in there. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. We have a few more people in the waiting room, and we will just wait a couple more minutes before we get started. But welcome to the Patent Behavior Bytes coffee break, addressing behavior as an administrator.
And Ron, I took it literally. I have my coffee.
Good. I finished mine before.
Well, I had that. But I was cued, you know, to have coffee.
Yeah. I just didn't think you wanted me on a third cup. And just a couple more people joining, and we'll get started. Welcome to everybody who is coming in. I see a lot of familiar names, and I see a lot of names that I don't recognize, so welcome. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to Patent Behavior Bytes Coffee Break, addressing behavior as an administrator. My name is Ron Logan. I am an educational consultant with Patent in the Patent East office. And joining me today will be Dr. Tina Lawson, also from the Patent East office, if you wanted to say hi, Tina. And welcome to everyone that is here. We are very glad that you've been able to take time from your schedule to join us for this. As we get moving, and maybe we will get moving here. There we go. As we get moving, we like to start with our patent mission, and that is to support the efforts and the initiatives of the Bureau of Special Education, and we work to build capacity of local educational agencies to serve students who receive special education services. We also support the Pennsylvania Department of Education's commitment to the least restrictive environment, and that is the goal for each child is to ensure that IEP teams begin with the general ed setting with the use of supplementary aids and services before considering a more restrictive environment for our student. As we get started, we want to mention just some of the controls that you'll see with Zoom. Everybody has been muted as you come into the room, and we have things set up so that you're not actually going to be able to chat in the meeting today, but you will be able to share through the chat message box. We have the start-stop video, and we are recording up in the corner. The third box for the invite, you won't need to worry about because we've taken care of that through our registration process. Under the participants, you can click on that to see other people who are joining the meeting. And if you hover over your name and select more, you can change the screen name. And there are also nonverbal gestures available for you to use. As we move to the share screen, that's a feature that Tina and I will be using. Again, I mentioned that the chat will be used to submit questions to the host, and Tina and I will be monitoring that chat box. And finally, we are recording this session. And I will show you shortly where you will be able to find this recording. We want to start with a matrix for today as we want to model PBIS, not only positive behavior interventions, but not only we want to model it, but we want you to kind of see how it can be used and interpreted in the virtual setting. So our expectations for today are that we will be respectful and that we'll be responsible. When we're in the whole group Zoom, we've been muted upon entry. We ask that you do be aware of your camera, check your background for any items, and if you do want to talk, please use the hand raise option. The responsible in the whole group Zoom, we ask that you do participate or respond, and remember to stay present on the Zoom. We will not be using breakout rooms today, but if we were doing that, again, we would ask you to be aware of your camera, use the hand raise option, enter and exit breakout rooms with established time frames, and complete the tasks and participate. We like this matrix because obviously it does support PBIS, and we model it. And we're going to talk a few minutes about how this can be used and implemented further and why some of these components are important for this. Kind of our day and age in our virtual world right now. So our agenda for today is we want to touch very briefly upon self-care, and we want to kind of look at it from that administrator lens. So we're going to talk very briefly about that. And then if you remember, some of you may saw a few weeks back that we did put out that if you had any questions, we put out a Google form and asked you to share questions with us. So this is what we have developed in response to about the 25 questions that we received. So we'll be talking about PBIS in the virtual setting. We'll be looking at PBIS in the home setting, and there is a difference. We'll be looking at implementing positive behavior support plans. We'll touch on emotional support in the virtual world, and we'll talk about social emotional learning for right now. As we start, I want you to just stop and think for a minute. It seems like this virtual world, the pandemic that we've been dealing with, the work from home, the shelter in place, wearing masks, it just seems like we've been living this. It seems like a lifetime, but it really hasn't. It's only been 6 weeks. It's been 37 school days, or if we translate that, that's 238 hours of class time. When we think about it, that's really not very much time. In those 6 weeks, we built school. If you think about it, we turned and kind of reformed our education system in response to this right now. And that's something that we need to stop and acknowledge and celebrate. I don't know how it was for you guys out in the field, but I know I had 2 hours notice that we would be leaving our office and working from home. And when we left on that Thursday afternoon, we were told at 2 o'clock, we left at 4 o'clock, and we were told, take with you what you need for a couple of weeks. Obviously, that's been 6 weeks now. I don't think anybody imagined or prepared it being this long. In that time, we have overcome a lot of hurdles and a lot of challenges. We've met the needs of our students in ways that we never imagined. We have buses that are running bus routes, delivering homework packets. We have buses running and delivering meals to families. We have buses set up in communities, being internet hubs and providing internet access. We have schools opening the doors to provide meals not only to the families but to the entire community. We have done some great things, and you as administrators and the people that support the administrators, you need to celebrate what you have done. So I want to make sure that you really take that time to acknowledge where we have been, where we are at now, and really the great accomplishments that we have made. So make sure to give yourself a little pat on the back for that. When we think about the pandemic, COVID-19 is a global pandemic. impacting millions around the world. It's a natural disaster that has affected everyone differently, not only from country to country, not only state to state, but community to community, family to family, and even within those family units, we're seeing it impacting people differently. We have people working from home who have never worked from home before. I've been in education 25 years now. I never thought I would be working from home as an educator. We have students that are learning from home that never thought they would be in that situation. We have people who are experiencing out of work, unemployment. My point is, the global pandemic, if we look at the definition of trauma, it's a national disaster of historical proportions. Everyone now has a traumatic experience in their past. Every student that is coming into school that sits in our virtual classrooms that we're providing meals to, that we're providing packets to, has had that adverse child experience now. That doesn't mean that we take away the other things that are happening, because those things are still happening in the world. If you look at the graphic on the screen, I love this graphic as it represents trauma. If you think of the tree, we have the things that we can visually see. We have the leaves, homelessness, incarceration, divorce, depression, abuse of different types. And those are things that we can see happening in that student's life. But there are also other things, if we think of the root, kind of the community impacts. What is happening around that student that's impacting their environment? Community violence, housing, community disruption, poverty. We still have students worrying about where their next meal comes from. And in this pandemic, we had students dealing with homelessness. Think about it now that that's raised up to a new level. My point being that we need to be aware of trauma and that we need to kind of start being trauma informed. Part of being trauma informed is taking care of ourselves. As an administrator, you have to think that you not only have one classroom, but you have many classrooms of students. You have many staff members that you need to think of. You have a community that you need to think of and support and make sure that things are in place to care for the needs of the community. And in order for you to do that, you have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Because while this pandemic is happening, you're dealing with things in your own home too. You're working from home. Some of you might have other children. You might have a spouse that's working from home as well. So it's a new setting and you have to take care of yourself. It's important that you practice self-care, and part of that practicing self-care is knowing yourself and taking care of yourself. And the reason that you need to do that is to achieve better outcomes for students. When we're taking care of ourselves, those around us, we're responding better to them and their needs. If we think about what's happening and how we respond as from the professional aspect, we look at the professional quality of life. When we have positive aspects happening in our life, when we're taking care of things, when we are practicing self-care, we have compassion satisfaction. That means we're staying in that positive setting, and our responses are able to be supportive and caring and positive. If we focus on those negative aspects and we're not taking care of ourselves, that's where compassion fatigue sets in. The burnout kicks in, and we start feeling the effects of secondary trauma. So we start taking on the trauma from those that we're trying to take care of. We can't take care of ourselves. We can't take care of others if we're not taking care of ourselves. So even in our personal life and in our professional life, we have to make sure that we're practicing that self-care. We talk about compassion resilience. And compassion resilience is that ability to take care of ourselves, our own well-being, while responding compassionately to others. We do that by setting expectations, we set boundaries, we develop this staff culture, we connect in healing ways that help. But part of that compassion resilience and allowing us to respond is the self-care piece. It's taking care of our mind, our spirit, our strength, and our heart. Self-care has been defined as providing adequate attention to one's own physical and psychological wellness. It is very critical that we are aware of the physical pieces and the psychological things. We take those breaks when we need them, that, we just kind of take the time to practice that self-care and get ourselves back into that positive place so that we can be those positive community leaders again. It's important to remember that self-care is not selfish. It's not something that happens just once a week. We only do it at, Sunday afternoons is when I do self-care. That's not really what the idea of self-care. It's something that needs to happen on a regular basis to kind of refuel our engines. Self-care is responsible. It's small strategies throughout the day. We do schedule self-care, but that's not the only time that we self-care. Self-care is about what works for you. It can't be somebody else saying you need to do this. And self-care is something that we all need. Thinking about self-care and along those lines, we also want to consider Zoom exhaustion. And this is something that I've really seen come out in the last couple of weeks. And what happens when we're in a Zoom or really any online virtual setting such as this, a couple of things happen. We're using the meeting platform in a way that I know I've never used the Zoom before. We've done virtual meetings, but never on the scale like what we're doing now. And so we're using it in new ways that kind of make us anxious, nervous a little bit. In a Zoom, we work harder to process those non-visual cues. We're looking at facial expressions. We're looking at for the body language. We're listening for the tone and the pitch. And if you think about the little boxes on the screen and how close we have to look at that and really kind of focus in, that's one area where we're getting hyper-focused. How easy is it when we're in a Zoom to multitask? I can turn off my camera, I can be checking email, I can be reading, I can get up and walk away. So there's another thing now that our attention is being split. The other piece to consider is that when we are in a Zoom or any online setting, we're in a very stimulus-rich environment. If you think about when we do face-to-face meetings and we go into a room, that environment doesn't change. It's one environment that we're sitting in with those people. Now, if you're in a Zoom and cameras are on, you now have 8 different environments that you're looking at. You're looking at the background, you're looking at the activity that's happening, you're looking every time somebody shifts in their camera, and you're wondering, I really like that picture. Where did they get that picture that's in their background? How can I get that? Or we see people come in with, we see a dog jump into the camera and people bring in pets. And those are nice things to see, but that's all adding to that environment and the stimulus. So it's adding to our exhaustion. So how do we combat that? Think about for a minute, that conference room setting where you go in and you sit down. What do you do when you go into that meeting? We grab our stuff, we take with us what we need for the meeting. We get there a couple minutes ahead of time, usually to, I like my seat at the end of the table, and we get everything just kind of set up around us. You want to kind of treat your Zoom meetings the same way. When you start a meeting, take a couple minutes at the beginning to kind of settle, ground yourself, ground your attention, get prepared for the meeting. We practiced that today. We got in about 10 minutes into the room before we let anybody else in so that we could test everything. We kind of laughed, had a couple chuckles, and and then we were ready. So we grounded ourselves and we grounded our attention. Greet who is in the room with you. That's kind of difficult to do when we have 90 people in the room. But when you're doing those smaller bites, those smaller meetings, take the time to go around and actually greet everyone and say hello. Kind of ground yourself to who you're with. Choose the speaker view. Don't have all of those little boxes open. Have the speaker box open so that you're only focusing on them. Resist that urge to multitask so that we're not dividing our attention anymore. And this is really critical. I know when I have face-to-face meetings, a lot of times it's always between meetings, you get up, you stretch, you move, maybe go get a drink of water, something to kind of break it up a little bit. I find myself now just jumping from Zoom to Zoom to Zoom, and very rarely do I take a break. I don't stand up. And so getting into that habit of practicing those things is really critical to kind of avoid that exhaustion. And then give yourself permission to recognize that this is a new setting. You don't have to jump right in and have everything 100% tech ready on the first day. Be comfortable with what you can do with your capabilities and build on it from there. But give yourself permission to recognize that this is new and it's still a learning process for you and for everyone else that is out there. So that's kind of ending our self-care piece and talking a little bit about Zoom. So now I want to jump in and we're going to start answering some of your questions or providing some guidance to some of your questions that were submitted. The first thing that I want to start out with is just a reminder. We are not providing legal, procedural advice or providing any information that PDE will be releasing information on a certain day. We do not provide legal guidance in that way, and you will need to contact your solicitor for guidance as far as timelines, procedures, specific cases, that type of thing. And right now, it's more critical than ever that you're having those conversations with your solicitors, because you want to maintain that continuity of education. Meaning, if you are providing something to one student, you need to provide that to all students. So you need to kind of take a look at where your district is at in that process and have those conversations with your solicitor to make sure that you're just providing all of the services that need to be provided. A few of the resources that we are using and that I want to highlight for you today, and I'm going to take you to a couple of these sites. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because last week's session with Dr. Holland Sims was on the resources, and you can find that actually, that recording, to listen to it. And I'm going to show you right now where you can find that. So we're going to start by going to the patent homepage. And on the patent page, you're going to see this yellow gold highlighted box that is Continuity of Education Planning Resources. This is our response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So what we have done is developed each initiative, has provided supports for families, students, and educators. And so you can see the list here. We're going to select on behavior. And when you scroll down, you'll see families, students, and educators again. On this page are a variety of resources, and you'll find this for every initiative. You'll see the office hours. Here is our behavior bites, and then additional resources, videos, resources from publications. You will see We have paraprofessional resources and then links to websites. Once you are on the educator page, you'll see the behavior bytes. And if you click this link, click the link down here where it says please access session materials. This is going to take you to a Google Drive where you'll find a folder for each week's behavior byte. In this behavior byte for today, you'll see some of the articles that I'm going to reference, a couple of the tools that I'm going to mention, and then once this recording is complete, the recording will be dropped in here so that you or others can go back in and listen to it. You can also find other sessions here. So going in last week, here's our session from last week, the recording of the website tour for Patton and other resources. Another site that I want to make sure that I take you to is PBIS.org. One of the things that I always like to make sure that I reinforce is that even if you're not implementing PBIS, these are still great resources to use and to reference. Especially right now, PBIS has developed several publications in response to what's happening right now. So we have responding to the novel coronavirus outbreak through PBIS, supporting families with PBIS at home, creating a PBIS behavior teaching matrix, and other publications. So we're actually going to use several of these today, but I want to show you where you can go and find those. One of the issues that we are seeing with resources right now is that there are just so many of them out there. And we get resources emailed to us all of the time, and we have our websites, and there's magazine articles and newspapers, and everything is coming out with resources. And it's kind of resource overload, and we have to be careful that we're not overwhelming our families and overwhelming our staff with the resources. So you kind of want to pick and choose. You're going to go with your favorites. You're going to go who you feel comfortable with. This is a website, CI3T, Comprehensive Integrated Three-Tiered Model of Prevention. Kathleen Lane, who has done a lot of work in Pennsylvania with us around universal screeners and other pieces. This is one of her projects along with a couple other people. And CI3T looks at building your three-tiered intervention program for academic behavior and SEL. They have developed a wonderful response to COVID-19 with additional resources for educators, teleteaching tips. You'll see resources for families. A lot of these are downloadable schedules and that type of thing. Checklists for administrators, checklists for educators, checklists for families. And then you'll see down here some resources for administrators. One thing that I want to share with you, Setting Up for Success, this is actually a publication that they put out, a message to administrators, just some nice resources that are really summed up, and you will actually find this publication in the Google Drive. I share this site with you because this is a site that I believe in and that I feel is a very valuable resource. The last website that I want to highlight today is CASEL, and CASEL focuses on that SEL, the social emotional learning for our students. On here, if you click under CASEL Cares, in response to what is happening right now, they actually are doing several featured webinars. Here's a great one, Leadership in Virtual Times, that I think is timely, coming up in about a week and a half. But they've developed over here some resources and guidance on SEL, and they've put together a lot of free resources. So I really want to highlight that website, and Tina will probably mention it again when she talks about social emotional learning towards the end. So we're going to get back out of here and get back to our presentation. So we looked at Patton, and I also want to make you aware that Patton does have a channel on the YouTube site where we've got hundreds of videos posted from all of the initiatives, some great resources there. We also have our Pennsylvania PBS network site, which supports the work being done here in Pennsylvania specifically. We have our comprehensive integrated 3-tiered model website that I just shared with you, PBIS.org. The Castle website, the Pennsylvania Department of Education, school closure, school guidance. They have a response to COVID-19 as well. And actually, I do want to take you back there. I forgot to show you that site. So we're going to go back to it for just a minute. When, if you remember, and now it wants to go slow. If we click on Patton, go to that gold box there. Here we have the gold box. We click here. We're going to come back in here to behavior. Behavior supports for educators, and Pennsylvania Department of Education, promoting positive learning at home. The site, but also if you Google PA Department of Ed, school closure, school guidance, they have a page of FAQ, frequently asked questions, that they update on a regular basis. This was actually updated 5:30 last night. They address a lot of your questions. They provide a lot of guidance as far as staffing, 180 days, continuity of education, providing special ed services. This is continually updated in response to questions from the field. So I wanted to show you that because I think it's an important place to go and to check on a regular basis. The other piece that I will share with you is you have an email for behavior@patton.net. I'm going to ask you to do 2 things. First of all, if you find this webinar helpful and you would like more information or more opportunities in the future to participate in webinars on behavior for administrators, please email that address, behavior@patton.net, and let us know that you would like these to continue. The other piece is if you have questions that we don't answer today or that you can't find in the FAQ, put that question in an email, send it to us, and we will be developing an FAQ as well. And if it's something specific, we can respond, or yeah, we will respond, or we will share resources with you to help you answer your question. So PBIS in the virtual setting, and I shared this publication with you. You can find it in the Google Drive. We're looking at remote instruction teaching matrix. So the big piece to remember within the teaching for remote instruction and kind of creating this PBIS model is that we still have to define, teach, and practice our routines, our expectations. If you think about it right now, we have new routines for entering the room, entering into a classroom. We have a new procedure for turning in homework. We have a new way for asking for help. All of these things need to be taught and explained. So we always want to start by sharing what our expectations are, and we kind of want to keep them in line with the expectations that we were using in the school setting. We're going to be focusing on learning behaviors right now, and we're going to be focusing on the things that we can actually have some control over. So either the work that is assigned or our actual instructional time. We're looking at that virtual setting. In this publication, you will see that there are some examples of matrices. And in the matrix, you'll see that be prepared could still be on that matrix, but be prepared is going to look differently now. Instead of coming to class with your materials, you're coming to class with your computer charged. So we'd stay on the same behavior expectations. We use the online activities, the virtual instruction piece as our settings. We want to consider the online specific behaviors that need to be taught, remembering that we need to define, teach, and practice, and then we need to teach those skills directly. When we are doing rewards, we want to focus on group rewards. We want to focus on the rewards around the learning, and we're kind of going to focus more on classroom-wide expectations and celebrations rather than specific tickets for economies or that type of thing. So we're looking at more school-wide. So now that we've talked a little bit about what that would look like setting up PBIS or a matrix in school, in the learning setting, what about in the home? So this is a little bit different. We're not looking at structuring the learning time, but now we want to support parents or families who might be dealing with anxiety or some challenging behaviors in the home. The family is going to want to set up a routine, a schedule. They're going to want to set up home expectations and define those. Just like we would teach, remind, and reward, the family is now going to teach, remind, and reward the behaviors with positive feedback, maybe even using some tokens, depending on the family. They are going to look at some of the social pieces you're going to have to get creative with. Can we do FaceTime or some type of Zoom with friends? Are there games that they can participate in? I'm not talking about video games, but we're seeing a lot of online board games now that are happening. So can they participate with their friends to still maintain that social connection? And then the family needs to model and promote emotional wellness too. Everything might not be okay, but they need to practice that self-care to model self-care for the student. So we've talked a little bit about PBIS in the virtual learning system setting, and we've talked about PBIS in the home. And again, I want to emphasize that I'm not saying that we go in and set up PBIS in the home, but this is information that we share with our families on how to set a routine and how to respond to some of these behaviors. When you're working with families, you want to remember a couple of things. They are dealing with this pandemic just like you are. And they're dealing with it in different ways. Learning that's taking place is going to look very different in every home. And it's important that we not judge what's happening. Some students are going to be respond well and work well on a very strict schedule, while others need that flexibility. Some families are going to work well on a strict schedule, while others need flexibility. Some things to think about now, if there are multiple kiddos in the home, does every student have a computer to be able to access their class schedules or their online classes? Does the family have internet capability to support mom and dad working from home and the children doing online learning all at the same time? What are the schedules like for students? We have some family friends who have 4 boys, a 3rd grader, a 1st grader, and 2 preschoolers. Angie is the type of mom that every administrator dreams of. When you put the email out and say, we need something, she's the first one at the door dropping stuff off. She's the one who, when you say we need the holiday luncheon For the staff, she comes to you a week beforehand to say, I need to close the library to redecorate and turn it into the winter wonderland. So Angie has it together. Angie knows what she's doing. Angie started out with a great schedule for her kids. She has shared occasionally through this, and I've seen the burnout in Angie. Angie shared one day that her third grader and first grader had 6 hours of Zoom in one day. The third grader had 4 hours, the first grader had 2 hours. That was 6 hours of Zoom that she had to oversee. And while she wasn't directly involved in it, in the learning process, she was there, and she saw that exhaustion in herself and in her kids. And what's happening now is her kids are choosing, they're picking and choosing what classes to go to. So right now they're only going to academics. They're not going to any of the specials that are being offered. They're not doing any of the STEM enrichment, anything like that. They are just doing the bare minimum academics. So you need to be flexible, and you need to think about what is happening in that home. And we do that by start asking, talking. We don't start just jumping in and you need to do this. When we're talking with the families, we want to start, how is the student doing? How is the family doing? Do they need anything? What questions, what support is needed? And then we always offer suggestions. We never tell them what to do. Crossing over into, telling how to parent can be a very fine line. So we always offer suggestions. And then in this time, it is really critical that we share the expectations, what we want the students to be doing. We share the absolute what they have to do. And then what things can they let slide? What things can be taken off the plate? What enrichments don't need to be done to kind of take some of that pressure off? So we want to switch now, and I know that we're moving really fast and just giving you a few bites of a lot of different topics, but we're going to move now from PBIS in that virtual setting, and we want to shift to some related services. So we're going to talk about implementing the positive behavior support plan, and I just want to remind you, this is not legal advice, and you need to refer specific questions to your solicitor. But I want us to think for a minute. FBA is an evidence-based process for gathering information to understand the function of the behavior in order to write the PBSP, that positive behavior support plan. That process, the FBA process, includes observation. It includes interviews with the student, with the family, with the staff, and it includes data gathering that looks at the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequences in a particular setting or in a particular context. So we're looking at maybe in the classroom, in a certain time of day, in a certain academic lesson. Thinking about those things, we need to ask, has the setting changed now that we're in the virtual online learning platform? How have the demands changed for that student? What reinforcements and consequences have changed in the setting? What about academic demands? Are those changed? Can we still observe and measure the behavior? My whole point is that we might not be able to implement that plan the way that it had originally been written. The behaviors might not be there anymore because the demands aren't present. The setting has now changed. So there's a lot of things that have changed, a lot of the antecedents, the behavior might have changed, and the consequences or the reinforcement for that behavior has changed. So we really need to take a look and determine if the positive behavior support plan really addresses the needs right now. We might need to do some tweaking. We might need to just wait and implement when that comes back, when we come back into the brick and mortar school setting. But how you implement that right now is where I would refer you to your solicitor. But just know that we need to kind of take a look at some of our behavior support plans, and that they can't just be dropped in the way that they are written now. I like to think of this as a little bonus piece, and anytime that I can get an audience with administrators and I'm talking FBAs, I like to share this. I know when I was an administrator, so many times I felt like, you know, there were so many FBAs going around and we never really knew, you know, if we were on track. And this is a tool that was developed by Rose, and I'll never say her name right, Iavone, I believe out of University of South Florida. And she was one of the authors who helped develop the technical adequacy tool for evaluation. And you can see that it's basically just a short checklist scoring guide. And what we do is we use that to look at the functional behavioral assessment. So we look at, have we collected all of the necessary input? Do we have everything identified and operationally defined? So it moves through several pieces looking at the FBA, and then it goes into the positive behavior support plan or the behavior intervention plan. And it does the same thing. It's got the scoring guide, and it just asks you to take a look at these things and to score. It helps you to determine the effectiveness and the adequacy of your FBAs and your positive behavior support plans that have been written up to date. A copy of this is in the Google Drive if you would like to take a look at that. And it's only about 18 questions, so it's not really long, it's not time consuming, but it is one of those great tools. So we want to shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to share the screen, or actually I'm going to let Tina take over now. And Tina is going to talk emotional support in the virtual world. And Tina, you're muted.
I was going to say, don't share the screen. You have the PowerPoints. Hi, everybody. Time check. It's 12:16. Are you still all with me? Can you give me a thumbs up in the reactions? Just everybody. Oh, I see Leah. But see down at the bottom, you have that smiley face. Give me a thumbs up. Thank you. All right. Catherine's with me still. Good, good, good. Shauna, are you with me? All right. Thanks, everybody. So we're winding down, and one of the questions that came into Ron was around emotional support. And do we still provide emotional support in the virtual world? Well, we have students that are out there that have that support need in their IEP, correct? So we are not giving you legal advice. We are just referring you back like we would if we were in a patent training. And we're saying, let's look at chapter 14. And we want to go back and determine what constitutes emotional support. So the determination of which it's a description or a type of support as defined in this chapter that the student will receive, the determination of which may not be based on the categories of the child's disability alone. So we don't just put students in emotional support programming just based on a diagnosis. There may be other types of supports that they need, but if they go into emotional support, there are other determinations. So go ahead, Ron. So when we're looking at emotional support versus learning support, I said to Ron yesterday when we were planning this, or not planning yesterday, planning this, but going over our dry run, it's like we finally had the opportunity to say, let's do emotional support the way it's supposed to be done. So what is emotional support? It's services for students with a disability, right, who require services primarily in the area of social or emotional skill development or functional behavior. So this idea of packets and sitting in seats and doing worksheet after worksheet and getting compliance is not emotional support. And all the stuff that Ron spoke about in the beginning about the self-care and how do you support your own needs, these are the kinds of things we need to be translating to the students who are in this this virtual world and in need of emotional support services. So how are we going to address the areas of social and emotional skills versus the students who are in that learning support area who require primarily in the areas of reading, writing, mathematics, speaking, and listening? So what is emotional support in the virtual world? This is what we need to start talking about. So Ron, can you go forward? So there was a question, and it's the next one after this one is, do we do SEL in this time? Well, SEL promotes the ability to recognize and manage your emotions. You know, I gotta say, there was some emotionality going on in this household today. I have a 15-year-old who is a freshman in high school, and he's doing his online schooling, and there's a lot of pressure still for him. So is it important that, not that he's in emotional support programming, but he needs to learn how to manage his emotions, and I need to learn like how to articulate better with him about that. There's a lot of pressure everywhere. What does SEL also provide? Relationship building, solving interpersonal problems, and helping us to make ethical decisions. So when we're looking at the students that we have on our caseload that require emotional support services, how can we not provide SEL programming, social emotional learning activities? So Ron had found this article in Ed Week, I believe it was, and I loved this, and it talked more about should we continue SEL in this virtual world, in this pandemic. So I want to read this out loud. Social emotional learning is critical to managing anxiety at this time. How many adults struggle with managing their anxiety, let alone these students who are trying to do it? Because if we don't know how to deal with the lack of control of our future or the feelings of uncertainty that you're having, your brain is going to stay in a constant fight or flight mode. And that comes from Mark Brackett out of Yale University. So if we go to the next slide, we talk about social emotional learning skills highlight and foster self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and responsible decision-making. And Ron has put the link down here for the Ed Week. Thanks. So what we have, thanks Ron, what we have in Pennsylvania, and I don't know how many of you are aware of it, the word is getting out. Maybe some of you are really familiar with it, but you're not thinking of putting it in this because it's kind of in a box. But if we talk about how do we do social emotional support services in this virtual world, I beg you to take a look at the PA Career Ready Skills. And if you look at what the three major domain areas of the PA Career Ready Skills, self-awareness, self-management, social problem-solving skills, and establishing and maintaining relationships. Does it sound familiar? When we look at what we just talked about on the previous slide, our PA Career Ready Skills are poised to be how we support our students in this social need area. Keep going. All right. So some points that we pulled out of that article was, how do you maintain that school community? How do we stay bound to the community that school provided? So some of our schools are doing Spirit Week, class time to chat with friends. This is a big one. I know, living here with a teenager, they need time to connect. I'll never forget the first day my Joseph turned on his online classroom and he saw all of his friends, and they were just so excited to see each other. I have also witnessed some pretty interesting Snapchat situations going on. And Snapchat, for those of you who don't know, that's what our teens really like to do to socialize. And so if we're not maintaining the social community and we're not teaching them about some of these things, some of the ways that they're connecting with their peers, like we've talked about, when we have kids that don't have great social skills and we just keep taking skills away, right? Instead of teaching new skills, they're just going to come up with more maladaptive ways to meet their needs. So if they're now filling a gap, because these kids want to socialize, if they're filling a gap with their social media, they're not always making great choices. So that's something that I think as schools and emotional support program, we need to take a look at. Recognizing emotions as a teacher, when we're looking, we are that, and administrators, as we are that gatekeeper of keeping a track of what's going on for our youth and what's going on, how can we support them? I encourage emotional support programming. I encourage journaling, drawing pictures, having some kind of auditory sharing, getting to see what's going on. I know I was just on a call yesterday where there's a school district, they're actually, when they're not hearing from kids, they're going out and, you know, keeping their social the distancing, but they're checking on these kids. And we know a lot of our children who perhaps need emotional support programming, the home may be a place that is not as supportive to their needs as school was. So getting to know and staying tapped into what's going on. We want to discuss, we want to talk about emotions. I know that sometimes, and Ron spoke about this, sometimes our external affect does not sync with what's going on internally. And a lot of times our children don't really even know what they're feeling inside because they haven't experienced this. Heck, I've never experienced a pandemic, and sometimes it's a shock to some of the feelings I'm having sometimes. So social connection, sometimes just giving them time with no set agenda, but having some rules, having time for that social connection piece. And we're gonna go on to the next slide. So with that being said, and we are coming down to the final moments of this webinar, I have provided here for you a lot of resources from the Career Ready websites. So we have here infographics. There is an Act 48 course that you can take that helps to introduce the Career Ready skills, defines and expands the social emotional learning through the PA Career Ready skills. And there is a link in this PowerPoint that will be up there. And the next one, Ron. And then here's a link into the SAS portal, PDE Office of Safe Schools. Then the third link there, PA Career Ready Skills Introduction, and it provides all of the different documentation that's in there that explains it, how it links to Danielson. So how do we do SEL in this virtual world? I suggest we all take a look and get real familiar with our Career Ready skills. And for the next one resource that I added on to here, this is a familiar slide, but I just want to note, Prevent Suicide PA. I really want folks to be aware of that website. Thanks, Ron. I want folks to be aware of that website. Take a look at, there's some great resources there. And again, linking back to that journaling and tapping into emotions. And it's not just about getting the academics done. Remember, how did we define emotional support programming? It's teaching our kids in the area of functional behavior and emotional need supports. So we want to be careful. We want to be mindful of what's going on and really take a look at that great website. And then Ron had gone over all the rest of this. Here are the behavior bites that are upcoming. Shonda and Tara will be doing supports for classroom management. Then we have supporting remote learning in a tiered behavioral framework. And I think I saw Drew on here. Drew. So we've got a lot more behavior bites coming through June. As Ron said, send your questions to behavior@patten.net. We really want to make sure that we're meeting your needs and give us feedback on that. And then this is just a reminder of who the state behavior leads are. We have Dr. Catherine Poggi, she is on our call. Dr. Nicole Holland-Sims, she's helping to manage all of the behind the scenes for today. Thanks, Nicole, and then myself. And last but not least, it's 12:28. The two of us, Ron and myself, we presented for you today, and I hope that this met your needs. And this is just one bite of behavior. So anything, Ron?
I have nothing to add.
Are there any questions we should? Okay, that's all we have. So Nicole, I think we can stop the recording maybe?
Thank you for joining us, everybody.
Yes.
And if you have any questions or anything, just feel free to reach out to us. If this is something that you would like us to do more of, targeting administrators, let us know through that behavior at patent.net. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.